Seated tonight. Amen. Well, tonight we have a very special guest that is up here with me, my wife Jennifer. And before we hear from the great one, I actually need to correct something I said. It's not doctrinally, don't worry about that, but this was just concerning the after party. The after party's not next week. How many of you caught that? Did anybody? Everyone? The after party's not next week. It is the week after on August the 1st. So you still have a few weeks to buy tickets. Just so you know, no one told me that. I just had to figure that out on my own during worship. See, I was supposed to be worshiping, and I was distracted because I knew something was wrong. Well, tonight, we are wanting to talk to you about some things. Jennifer and I have been going over a few things and just talking about some things between us and things that we see in churches and marriages and those types of things. And so tonight we want to talk to you about two marriage killers that can creep into relationships. Now, there's a couple caveats before we begin because, first of all, I want to say that these are two things that hurt marriages, but we're talking about decent marriages, okay? We're talking about marriages that are halfway normal. We're not talking, so these are not, if we were going to talk about marriage killers, we might want to go the big route like unfaithfulness. We might want to talk about some really big things. We're not talking about those things tonight. We're just talking about some things that when you have a pretty decent and a pretty good marriage, when both people are trying to live for God, these things can still creep in and can still harm the relationship. The other caveat that we wanted to say is, even everything that we've talked about in this whole conference, I would say everything that we've talked about since we started Marriage in the Family, none of the things that we can tell you or talk about or read in books or listen to in podcasts, there's nothing that anybody can tell you that's going to make your marriage better if you don't have the first thing right, which is your relationship with God. And so many times we get in here and we talk about communication, we talk about kindness, we talk about love, we talk about selfishness. All those things are the small pieces of the puzzle. And there's like the one glaringly obvious thing. If you have all that stuff right, you could try to be kind, you could try to be unselfish, you can try to do, but if your relationship with God is not right, none of that's going to help you. And your marriage is going to struggle. And on the other hand, if you didn't hear a single marriage teaching, if you never read the first book, all you had was the Bible, you could have a very happy marriage just from reading what's in that book, just from reading what's in Scripture and applying the love walk and applying those things in your life and putting God at the center. You could have a strong marriage just based on that. It doesn't hurt us to talk about any of these things. Some of you might think, well, we could just go home tonight then if we don't have to worry about that. No, I still think it's important to talk about the things, but please understand the number one thing you can do for your marriage is work on your relationship with God. Because when and I want you to talk about this as well, because I know this is something you've communicated to me so many times. When I'm with God where I need to be in my prayer life, and I'm in the Word every morning, I get up every day, I'm praying, I'm in the Word, it's so much easier to be a better husband. And somehow, miraculously, she just seems like a better wife. I don't know if it's just because I'm seeing her through God's perspective or what, or maybe it's all my prayer working, I'm not sure. But somehow it just affects the marriage because you're just a better person. Not only are you a better husband when you're praying and in the Word, you are a better father, a parent. You are a better worker, employee. You're just a better person in general. And you know what? I like it that way. I want to be dependent on God like that. I want to have to go and spend time with God, or else I see everything else dropping in my life. I don't want to just be able to go through life and not need God. But the fact is, I do need God. And you know what? I think that's how He wants it. He wants us to depend on Him and need Him. And so that's number one, is if you think you're going to work on your marriage, and have this great marriage without God, then you're completely in the wrong place tonight. All right, you might can go find some other help somewhere else or read some, but if you're not going to put God first in your life, there's really nothing we can help you with. And personally, I don't think anybody can help you with, because there's just going to be certain things that you can't get healthy without God in your life. Let's see.
It's on.
We are on green mic. Check. Nothing? Okay, we're going to pass the baton.
Wow, we did that pretty seamlessly. I would say that, obviously, I personally think that Joshua is the most attractive man on planet Earth. What? But what? What is the most attractive thing is his relationship with God. And ideally, of course, you would want to start that before you get married. So if you're married and you don't have that relationship with each of you have your own relationship, that's a separate subject. So there's hope, obviously. But in 20 years of ministry, I would say I want to just take a second to talk to some of our single people. I know we're in a weird age where people are finding each other later, and there's the tendency, I'm getting older, the time clock, especially if you're female, you're like, this got to happen soon. I mean, nature's working against me. I would say that you need someone that loves Jesus passionately. The marriage is hard enough and difficult enough. Then you add children. Some of you start with children. It's tough enough. If you don't have your own personal relationship, you're going to suffer. And we have counseled so many couples, and some have made it through and some haven't. And they said their main thing is, I wish I had known some of this earlier or before I got started. So if you are single, I would not be dragging someone behind me spiritually. That is your perfect position to know that person before you enter. And of course, a marriage relationship, you should grow together. But I know some of you guys have found yourself divorced. You're single, maybe your husband or wife passed away. Don't get impatient just because you're getting older. Stay the course, because God has someone for you. He knows your age. He's not shocked by your age. And just wait, because we're not living in easier times. We're living in more difficult times. Look at the divorce rates. Look at the divorce rates in the church. So obviously we need something more than just two cute people getting married. Everyone who gets married loves each other in that moment. Everyone that says their vows loves each other, and maybe for years to come. But love is not enough. When we're having dips and we're having tension or we're having frustration, he's adorable, but then I just silently murder him, but I can't get away with it. It's just the fact that love is not enough. But when I'm anchored to Christ, God will whisper to me. Well, I joke that I try to steam. I try to get aggravated. when we get in an argument, I want to stay mad for days, but I can't do that. I have a relationship with God, so when I get quiet, it's like I can hear God go, "You're gonna reach out and touch him? No, I don't want to touch him. Hug him? No, I don't want to hug him." And there's even the joke, don't let your wrath go down the sun. I got it all messed up. Yes. And so, you could argue with God that the sun's already down, but it's like, that doesn't float with God. And if you've ever been angry, there are true moments where you're angry at your spouse. Maybe it lasts for a few days, but we have made a commitment to God, and God is my source of life. And God is not, if you're wanting your prayers to work, you're wanting your relationship to work, you got to have God. He's not, even though your spouse is adorable, whenever you're mad at them, they're the least adorable person in the room. All you want to do is get out of the room.
What she's trying to say is, even when your spouse is perfect, you're still going to have difficulty. Is that what you're saying?
I'm so perfect. You're right.
That's what I was saying. That's very good. And we just wanted to get that out of the way, that, the relationship with God, that is the crucial thing. And if you're going to do anything, that's got to be number one, is that relationship with God. So tonight we wanted to get in, though, to two things that they do destroy and hurt marriages, two killers of decent marriages. And the first one is negativity. Is that echoing? Can you hear that? I'm going to go back to this mic. I'll give you the terrible mic. I'm just kidding. Let's see if we can get two microphones that work. If there's one that's doesn't have reverb, I don't know if the green one works. Yeah, go back to the green. We're going to try green again. Mel's got it for you. Try that. Try that one.
Hello.
Got it. Let's give the sound booth a hand.
We love y'all.
One of our sound men just had a baby, David Martin. Well, his wife had the baby, but so he's out for a couple weeks, so they're a little shorthanded, doing a great job back there. Appreciate you guys. So the first one, first marriage killer is negativity. All right, this is something that every marriage gets affected by, and I just want to, as we begin to think about this, I want you to think about this idea that most people do not realize how negative they're being. If anybody was to ask you, are you a critical, negative person, you would probably say no. Most people would say no, but many people do not realize how negative and how critical they actually can be. And when we're talking about negativity, we're not only talking about being negative towards your spouse, we're just talking about being negative in general. Just a negative vibe, negative energy, negative presence that every time, there's conversation and there's just this complaining, critical type mood. And it's not like you're either negative or positive. It's everybody's along the scale somewhere. Some are more negative than others and some are more positive than others. But negativity kills a marriage. The other day, Jennifer and I went to a local restaurant, and as soon as we walked in, this overwhelming, pungent smell filled our nostrils. Like we walked in, as soon as we walked in, we thought, man, I said, do you smell that? She said, yeah, it smells terrible. And we were like, just were hit by it. And we eat there a good bit, and we'd never noticed it before. And so when we got to the counter, I asked the lady that was behind the register, I said, do you smell that? And she said, smell what? I said, never mind. I mean, it's a terrible smell. I don't know if you can smell it. She said, I don't smell anything. And what I realized is, she had gotten used to it. And that's how it is with negativity a lot, is you think, you don't know, you think I'm not being negative, but sometimes you've lived with negativity for so long that you don't really know another way to exist. You don't know another way to communicate. You don't know another way to talk. Sometimes there's like a rut. And every time two people get together and they start talking, somehow it leads towards complaining. It leads to talking about someone else, talking about a problem, talking about an issue. And what that does, it just drains the marriage of life, that drains the life out of marriage. Another thing I wanted to say about negativity is that there is spoken negativity and there is unspoken negativity. So it's not, you might be the type of person that maybe you got good control of your mouth, and so you kind of zip it and you control the negativity with your mouth a little bit, but it's just all over you. The presence, that just bad air is all over you. That really drains the life out of a marriage. You want to jump in there?
Well, I've been redeemed from negativity.
Yeah.
I know it's a personality. A lot of times my personality is very analytical. I can tend to be a glass half full, and part of that is it can be a discernment too. I can discern and pick up things about people, but then my tendency used to be to just be super negative and assume the worst, and I actually had to train myself to do the opposite, and I think that I didn't know until we were dating.
Right, and that's the thing is people, a lot of times they don't realize that they're being that way. I want to give you just a few quick points about negativity, and we'll both kind of just jump on these. And if you're taking notes, I encourage you to write these down because it's something that you need to meditate on later. And a lot of the things we talk about, you're not going to just absorb all the information in one night, but it is really good to go back and look at these things and think about them. But number one is this: negativity is often just a dysfunctional way to communicate. Negativity is often just a dysfunctional way to communicate. In other words, I'm upset about something and I'm trying to let everybody around me know. Instead of just communicating and talking about what's bothering you, what the real issue is, you want everybody to know, I'm mad, I'm upset, this is bothering me, and it should be bothering you, and I'm going to let you know, I'm going to let everybody know that I'm going through something, and everybody's going to know it, the kids are going to know it, spouse is going to know it, everybody's going to know it, and if I try to let all of them know and they don't know, I'm going to post it on Facebook. Somebody's going to know. So often it's just a dysfunctional way to communicate. And when it comes to communication, habits are built with communication. So usually the way that we started communicating from the time we were kids, it just carried over into marriage. If you got used to pouting in your home and it worked, then that probably carried over into marriage. If you got used to complaining or crying and it got somebody to move, then you kept doing it, and it's probably carried over. And it's really frustrating when you get in a marriage and that doesn't work on that person. So you just amp the negativity up even more, trying to get them to move, get them to do something. There's a much better way to communicate when something's bothering you than just negativity. You know, it's much better to sit down and communicate with your spouse in a clear, healthy, loving way than to just go around with days for negativity. And another way to say it is often negativity is just a form of manipulation. Just trying to manipulate the other person to get your way, throw your weight around, or almost even punish them enough until you get, your way. Nothing there? Okay.
Right.
Number 2, actually I just said that one, which is negativity is often a dysfunctional way to get what you want. Or manipulation, we said. The third thing you need to know about negativity is that negativity has a root. It has a cause. So there's something causing that. So as we talk about it tonight, you're probably not going to be able to just decide, okay, I think I'll stop being negative. If you've been that way for decades, you're not going to just decide tonight, yeah, I think I'll stop doing that. It's hurting my marriage, and it's probably not a good idea to do it anymore. Well, it's usually not quite that simple because there's a root to it. There's a reason why you are unhappy. There's a reason why you complain so much. There's a reason why you are negative. I, for one, I think I'm a little bit on the other end. I don't really tend to be as negative or glass half empty type person. But I know after a long day at work, things going on, as I drive home, oftentimes I will have to put myself in a positive mood because maybe some things that have been going on or stressful situations, I will be intentional as I'm driving home to put myself in a mood because when I get home, I don't want everything I've been dealing with just to pile on the kids and follow me through the door. So I have to be very intentional about it. But there is generally a root cause, and you've got to figure out what that root cause is. Why do I tend towards negativity? Is it because, my relationship with God is not right? Is it because I'm in a job that I can't stand and don't want to be in? Is it because there are real issues in the marriage that we're just not talking about and not dealing with because it feels hopeless? Do we need to see a counselor? There's something causing it, and you got to figure out what it is.
And you all know, you probably, if you don't live with someone who tends to be negative, you've probably worked around people, and it just drains the atmosphere, and you find yourself not wanting to be around that person. And in a marriage, you're trapped. It's not really fair to your spouse that you would continue to do this and not try to change because they're trapped. And if you're in a godly marriage, you don't want to trap your spouse and now they have no alternative but you, and you're not pleasant to be around. And I think that, the root, a lot of times when you said jobs, even stress, I will notice that tendencies sneak back up when I get stressed out. And I had to start asking God, why do I feel that negativity popping up? And it was because I wasn't handling stress right. So, it can be something simple. And underlying things in the marriage, that is the worst. Obviously, when you're feeling negative and aggravated, you don't want to communicate. But if you don't communicate, you're not going to solve the problem. But a lot of time, if you're a negative person, when the more positive Polly comes to be, presenting the fact and be laid back, they're calm about it, then you have a tendency to just be negative and you're shutting down the communication. So a habit I started years ago was listening to myself. I started listening. Okay, what am I saying? What am I doing? And it affects him. It affects the kids. It can affect people around you. And I really care about him and my kids. And so I want to nip that.
It's good. Someone yelling from the back. Okay, also this one, negativity creates resentment. Negativity also creates avoidance. So people will avoid you when you are negative, because most people in general, even if they're negative themselves, they don't like being around other negative people. So negativity creates avoidance. Also, negativity creates self-justification in the other person. So when you are hypercritical, if you've noticed this is with people in general, and in marriages also, is when we criticize other people, and there is a place to communicate about issues and things in a proper way. But when we're overly critical and we're telling somebody about their faults and all their issues, all it usually creates in the other person is self-justification. It doesn't usually change them. It just causes them to justify themselves and to try to explain to you why everything that you're saying is not right. So not only is negativity so difficult, excuse me, but it also usually just creates excuses in the other person.
Well, and you're not going to get anywhere in a relationship, friendship, marriage, if you cannot communicate. And there are all types of people. I don't know what your communication style is, but there are people that get more aggressive. There are people who shut down. There are people like, I don't want to talk about this right now. And then you try to talk later, and they don't want to talk later. It's this negativity, though. If you have that person in your relationship that's doing that, then you're not going to create that atmosphere for communication. You're not going to be open. They're not going to want to talk to you. They're not going to want to solve any problems. It's exactly what you said. They're going to want to avoid you, run from you. And I've even heard some women, because men are usually better at compartmentalizing their, emotions and their even negativity. I know plenty of negative men. I'm just saying they're better at compartmentalizing. And when women, we tend to be emotional. And even if we can close down and not be talking, we're just on the inside. There's a river of emotion running, and it's just, you can tap it really easy. If you've ever been in a relationship, you know that you can tap it. And men can compartmentalize, and they can deal with it. So if you as a wife are negative, your husband's just going to compartmentalize it and go on. He's not going to want to deal with you.
And for the believer, the good news is that we have supernatural joy that comes from the Holy Spirit. So if you find yourself being negative, oftentimes that's just a sign of you're empty of the fruit of the Spirit. You're empty of the indwelling of the Spirit. You're just drained. But we have so many scriptures that talk to us about the power of joy and having supernatural joy in our life. I don't believe Jesus walked around mopey all the time. I don't believe Jesus walked around upset. I believe, even though he had a difficult life and a difficult road ahead of him, I believe he walked around with joy. What about Paul the Apostle? Paul the Apostle had so many difficulties, shipwrecks, beatings, imprisonment. You know what he said? And the apostles along with him in the book of James, count it all joy. Count it all joy when you meet trials of various kinds. In other words, you've got to have joy in the midst of that. In Romans chapter 15, verse 13, it says, "May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in believing, so that by the power of the Holy Spirit you may abound in hope." A believer's life should be filled with joy, peace, and if that's absent, you've got to figure out why. A marriage should be filled with those types of things. Proverbs chapter 17:22 says, "A joyful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones." Psalm 118:24 says, "This is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it." And I love Nehemiah 8:10. It says, "The joy of the Lord is your strength." Isn't that interesting? The Bible says that joy can actually be strength for you. And negativity does the opposite. It saps strength and it drains strength. And so many times we're experiencing that we just need to turn to God. I know that's not what people want to hear because well, that just sounds cliche. Well, and I don't mean it as a cliche. I mean it in literal. You've got to turn to God. When you're feeling that way, you need to go to prayer. Maybe you need to turn on some worship music. Maybe you need to spend some time with God in order to get that joy back in your life.
We have talked about this so many times. The enemy tries to make everything such a big deal in your life. And it's not usually that big of a deal. There are obviously big things in your life, in your personal life, in your marriage that are big deal. But typically, it's just that you need to pray. And you need to read the Bible. Maybe you need to listen to a sermon. Maybe you need to worship. Whatever, it's just not usually that huge of a deal.
Absolutely. Okay, so number one, we got to nix the negativity. Get rid of it. Whatever you got to do it, get rid of it. And number two, another killer of a good or a decent marriage is the inability to communicate. The inability to communicate. This could be communication about difficult things, but so many times it's difficult for couples to communicate just about simple things. Things that should be simple are overblown. And I just want to read you a couple of scriptures. I mean, we know how critical communication is. When you're living with a person day in and day out, you've got to be able to talk to each other about, simple things, work through difficulties, who's going to take the kids to soccer practice, who's going to work, who's going to cook. All these things have to be worked through and talked about constantly. So when a couple has poor communication, everything can turn into a fight. Something that you should not even be fighting about just turns into a fight because the communication is just so poor. And there are usually underlying reasons for that, but this is something that plagues a lot of marriages, just the inability to communicate, either about simple things or especially about difficult things. I want to read to you a couple quick scriptures. James chapter 1, verse 19. It says, "Know this, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. This is the recipe for healthy and proper communication." Quick to hear. In other words, a good listener, not interrupting, not jumping in to defend yourself. Listen, quick to hear, and slow to speak. So the first two things, both of them really have to do with listening. Number one, he says, be quick to hear, ready to listen. But then also being slow to speak is actually speaking about listening, because he's saying, don't respond quickly. Instead, listen. Listen. And then he said, when you do respond, slow to get angry. Don't allow anger to jump in. How many of you know just this one passage right here could transform your communication in marriage? Could transform it. That's why some men they get criticized for this, because the wife will be talking to them, getting at them, and they're wanting a response. They're wanting, hey, and they'll look at them and they'll say something. And then, well, you weren't done yet. I mean, I was just listening. I was actually trying to hear what you were saying. I just want you to say something. Well, I'm listening. That's why when Jen is talking about something that she's passionate, I'll just listen. And sometimes it'll be communicated, I think, as maybe a lack of concern that I'm not saying anything. But I'm trying to listen and hear you out fully. I don't want to interrupt. And I think that's important when it comes to solving things, is not interrupting each other and listening to the other person and making that pact to fully listen and hear the other person out. And then the last part of it is to be slow to get angry. Slow to get angry. Anytime that anger comes into the equation, any type of healthy communication is generally over. I mean, if you were communicating well, when anger comes in, any type of healthy communication is generally over. It's only going to go downhill from there. So that's why this verse is so just complete in how to have healthy communication. Be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. And then in Proverbs chapter 25:11, it says, a word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver. We all know how wonderful it is when somebody says something just right. Maybe you've seen a quote. We read quotes like that, or people post quotes all the time on social media, and it's like, man, that was said just right, in a way that I could understand, and it was perfect. It was what I needed to hear right at that moment. He said, a word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver. I think these two passages together, what they're talking about, being slow to speak, quick to hear, saying the right thing, it requires us to be thoughtful in what we say and to take time to think before we speak. That's really what all this is communicating. Because when it says a word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver, you could also say a word wrongly spoken is also very sharp and damaging. And you could say the wrong thing in the right moment, you could just zing somebody and hurt them for life. I heard somebody say one time that, words are like bullets. Once they're released, you don't get them back. And they're going to hit a target. So in marriage, it's so crucial that, we communicate clearly.
And it's not, obviously, you've communicated or not communicated. It's not always easy, and especially in a marriage relationship, if someone's bringing something that's bothering them, your immediate thing is to explain yourself and to defend yourself and to be understood. And in that moment, you just have to hear them out. And then, in healthy communication, then you would get to rebuttal. It's really cute when it all goes right, but it doesn't always go right. But that's the goal, is to be able to communicate openly. Hey, this is bothering me. And the person go, that's important to you, even if you're not guilty. That's what I had to learn, is even if I don't see it, it's bothering him, and that makes it important. Even if it's something that I think you shouldn't even be bothered by that, or vice versa, it's important, it bothers him, and I'm going to look at that, and I'm going to do my best to change it.
That's good. All right, some things that cause problems in communication. I just want to give you 4 quick things that can cause difficulty in communication. Number 1 thing is insecurity. Just insecurity on our part in communication. Insecurity is the number 1 thing that breaks down communication, because all insecurity is, it is a lens through which you perceive things. It's your worldview about yourself, about the person. And anytime you deal with low self-esteem or insecurities in a particular area, you're going to constantly misinterpret what other people are saying. You've probably all had experiences like this, where you're texting somebody and you said something simple and they came back, with, well, Guy, you're sure being grouchy today, or something like that. What? I was just texting. But they read emotion into the text, because the text was just plain and there's no emotion. They read something into it that wasn't there. Well, it wasn't on your end, but it came out of their own insecurity. I can't tell you how many times, because as a pastor, I have a lot of meetings, and I can't tell you how many times I come out of a meeting and I think to myself, man, that was a great meeting. Like, we had a good talk, and there's some good things. And next thing I know, somebody's upset, mad, saying I said this. I'm like, I don't know if they were even in the room, because that never got said. But that's what they heard. Never got said. But somehow they twisted that. And where did that come from? It came from their lens, from their own insecurity. Insecurity is the number 1 thing that causes problems in communication. Not only does it cause you to constantly misinterpret what the other person is saying, it causes you to be defensive whenever you're trying to problem solve. Because you could be talking about an issue, and when the moment somebody starts shining the spotlight on you, you can't handle it. I'm going to do whatever, and that's usually what happens in communication. I'm going to do whatever I have to do to get the spotlight off of me as quick as possible. If I've got to turn it back on you, if I've got to bring up your past, if I've got to say, well, what about when you did that? Whatever I've got to do to get the spotlight off of me and onto you or onto somebody else, I'm going to do it. If it means hurting you, if it means talking down to you, if it means criticizing you, I've got to get the attention off of me. Where does that come from? Insecurity. Because a confident person can handle being corrected. Somebody who's confident in themselves can handle somebody talking. They can handle criticism. They can handle somebody talking about them because I'm confident who I am. It doesn't just destroy me if you tell me you don't like me. It doesn't destroy me if you point out a flaw because I'm confident in who I am and who I am in God. And it doesn't just destroy me when somebody, whether that's my spouse, whether it's somebody else, even if I disagree with them, it's your opinion. And if you help me see something that I didn't see, great. Let's move forward. Nobody's perfect in that. But the more secure you are, the better communicator you're going to be. Insecurity also causes people to put up masks, and so it makes your communication shallow. Whenever we have insecurities, we're not vulnerable, so we don't open up and reveal our true feelings. So our communications are shallow, they're surface. And so we don't have any true intimacy there. Anytime you want to jump in on something, that's fine.
Well, with that, I would just say in a marriage relationship, insecurity can sometimes be created when you've had an ongoing issue that one of you haven't been able to conquer, and you have to keep going over the issue, and then you have to, it's like that person gets insecure, like that's all you see in me is that problem. And I think that's one of the big hang-ups we hear when we're counseling is you actually realize that, there's a root issue that you guys have been dealing with for multiple years, and it's created insecurity that you feel like every time they're talking to me about anything, they're really talking about that issue secretly. And then you can get vindictive, obviously, in relationships where you are touching that sensitive area intentionally but real subtle, and that's, of course, dangerous.
So the second problem, and it's very similar, is pride. Pride and insecurity look very similar. It's often very hard to tell the difference between pride and insecurity because often they react the exact same way. But insecurity is where you have a low self-esteem, but pride is where you have an inflated view of yourself, or you could say this way, it's just not having an accurate view of yourself. And really, we don't have time to get into it tonight, but the real root of pride is not having an accurate view of yourself. It is not thinking highly of yourself. It is thinking of yourself accurately. Pride is thinking of yourself inaccurately, but the proper way to view yourself is to think about yourself accurately. That's just confidence. In other words, I want to see myself as God sees me, in reality. I don't want to think higher than myself. I don't want to think lower of myself. I just want to think accurately about how I am in this life, and that comes from how God sees me. I believe it was it's either in 1st or 2nd Corinthians where Paul says, let each person not think more highly of himself than he ought. In other words, there's a way you ought to think about yourself. Don't think more highly of yourself than you should. So when you are prideful, it breaks down communication as well. That's a huge barrier in communication because you can't tell a prideful person anything. They already know it. You can't tell them anything. They have all the answers. So there's no humility there. So it's a huge barrier in communication. Another barrier to communication is just immaturity. Just immature, just acting immature, responding in an immature way. And then number 4, we already mentioned, is anger. And dealing with anger and allowing anger to come into the communication issue. Now, one thing I want to mention about these two issues that we've talked about so far, about negativity and the inability to communicate. I would say this is, every time you do this, somebody's going to get mad at you, but in general, it seems that women struggle more with the negativity. This is not always the case. In general, just a generalization, women seem to struggle more with the negativity, probably because they're more in touch with their emotions in general, and men seem to struggle with the communication issue more. And again, not always, not in every case, but men often struggle with communication. A lot of times a man's tendency with communication is when things start ratcheting up, when emotion starts coming in, when feelings start coming in, and pressure starts coming in, my tendency is just to withdraw. Now, you might think that men like to fight, and by nature they like to fight, but they don't like to fight with their wives. Men do not like to fight with their wives. So often the only thing they know to do is just shut down. Because if I say anything, I know from past experiences what's going to happen. I'm going to say something mean. I'm going to say something hurtful. And it will be with me for a lifetime. I will never forget it. I will always be reminded that this was said. And I may not. So men, their tendency is, you know what? I'm just going to withdraw. There's a big complaint that you hear from women a lot when it comes to communication with men is that he's just withdrawn, he's distant, he's detached. I will tell you this. Again, there is a root cause for that. There is a reason for it. I can't tell you it happens every single Sunday in the foyer. It happens in my office constantly that I talk to men that I have heard their wives say, my husband don't ever talk. I can't ever get him to say anything. And I think, well, when he's around me, I can't get him to shut up. We're talking about everything, talking about the weather, talking about hunting, talking about sports, talking about his job. What are you talking about? I can't get the man to stop talking. There's a root cause to the withdrawn part and the inability to communicate. There's a reason for it, and it is not just because your husband doesn't like to talk. Get him in the right place with the right people in the right environment, he will talk. There's a reason, and I know this sounds terrible, but there might be a reason that he does not talk to you. I'm speaking from a man's perspective. The same could certainly be true with women on either side. I'm just speaking from the man. But if there's an issue with communication or why somebody's not engaging you the way that you want to be, understand there might be a reason. I don't know if any of you have read a famous business book out for decades called How to Win Friends and Influence People. Probably so many of you have probably read that. In that book, one of the things he talks about is just asking questions. If you want to improve communication with your spouse, sometimes the thing you got to do is just start asking questions about them. Asking them questions, because a lot of times the communication, the way it starts going, somebody's doing all the talking, and they want you to comment on what they're saying, but there's not any questions being asked. I told my kid, now I got my kids saying this. You'll hear them say this every now and then because I told them this. We'd be in the car together, and one of them turned to me and said, so what you want to talk about? And I said, son, that is the worst way to start a conversation you could possibly imagine. So what do you want to talk about? I mean, you got to be a little more creative than that. Ask me a question. Ask me a real question. Don't just start the conversation, so what you want to talk about. So you got to be a little more creative than that. Ask me about sports. Ask me about the weather, something. So it's the same way in marriage. We've got to be intentional about asking questions and being interested in the other person.
Well, and as you know, we have more words than men, and we can talk a lot. And I don't know, different seasons, like with my kids, I wanted to adult when he got home, and I would just talk. I found myself one time, I'm not even a chatty person. I think I talked to him 2 hours straight. And I was like, oh, he hasn't said a word. And it was because I just was blah, 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 blah. So even just pausing for a moment, and we've done this. I've tried to train myself. This is not, if we're driving, especially on a long, hour or more, I will just be quiet. And it's like, I've got a dozen things I can talk about. I can talk about my shoes, I can talk about my nails, I can talk about anything, I can talk about the dirt. I mean, I'm a woman. So I'll be quiet though, and sure enough, maybe 15 minutes in of silence, just pure silence. Side note, have you ever asked your husband, well, what'd y'all talk about? I don't know. That's just the same thing. So I just get quiet, and then he'll just start talking, and he'll chat all the way to wherever our destination is. And it was funny because it actually came out of a funny argument. We were kind of jokingly arguing. We were in an argument, but we kept it light. And he's like, if you would just stop talking, I've got things I could say. So, just stop talking. I got you all. I rabbit trailed.
Well,
a point, but I didn't take it back.
No, I was just thinking about what you're saying, and I was trying to figure out, okay, that is true. Why do I do that? I think because for me at least, if I'm listening to you, then I can't process my own thoughts and think about what I'm listening to you. But if you give me a minute, while we're driving and I'm sitting there thinking in my own thoughts, then I think about something substantive to talk about, then it comes out. It takes a while, Y'all are probably never coming back, marriage and family.
Have you ever sit? I mean, I don't know. He golfed for a while, and there were like 3 of them on a golf cart for hours. What did y'all talk about? Nothing. What'd you do? Nothing.
We played golf. I mean,
I would know the whole life story.
Talked about that horrible shot. All right, we're going to, last thing I want to mention here before we finish up tonight, I want to give you just 6 quick keys to healthy communication. This is what, if you're going to have healthy communication in your marriage, these are 6 quick things that you have to have. Number 1 is you got to walk in love. You got to walk in love. And this is number 1 because probably if you just did number 1, that'd be all there was to it. Because when you read in 1 Corinthians 13 about walking in love, love is patient, love is kind. Love thinks of the other person, on and on. So if you just walked in love, so many communication things would be solved. I'm amazed at how we just throw this out the door oftentimes when emotions come into it, that we can treat our spouse and say things that looks nothing like the love of Jesus Christ. Let's not forget that we have His love on the inside of us, and that it can control the words that we say. It can affect the things that we say. So number 1, you got to walk in love. Number 2, fight the problem instead of each other. Fight the problem instead of each other. So many times we're trying to communicate about a difficult topic, and actually we're on the same team and we should be fighting this. But because we have a difference of opinion and it seems to point, well, it's my fault and it's yours, we start fighting each other. Well, what happens? We're not fighting the problem. We're fighting each other. Even if the problem is me, even if the problem is something I did or a habit I have or a characteristic I have, we can still work together to fight that. It doesn't have to become personal. It only becomes personal if I'm insecure about it. We can come together and say, that's a great, I see what you're saying. I think here's why I do that. Let's work on that together. But you've got to have that mindset. We're not going to fight each other. And I think it's important maybe to say that when you start getting ready to communicate on a difficult topic, is to say, hey, we're going to talk about this, but let's make a commitment. We're not going to fight each other. We're going to fight the problem. We're going to team up, and we're going to get this solved. Number 3, and ladies may not like this one, some men too, you got to keep emotions low. You got to keep emotions low. And I hear people say, well, I'm just passionate. It's not good for communication. It's not good when you need to communicate about something in a healthy way. If you want to be passionate about your day at work, you want to be passionate about a movie you saw, great. But when you are trying to communicate about a difficult topic, you have to keep emotions low. I love this statement. This came from Pastor Craig Groeschel of Life Church. He said, when your emotions are high, your wisdom is low. So good and so true. When your emotions are high, your wisdom is low. So oftentimes in communication, what happens? The emotions start to escalate. And they just keep going up. And what's happening? The more emotion that comes into it, the more personal it gets, and the more your filter gets turned off, and you start to say things you didn't mean to say in a way you didn't mean to say it. And before you know it, you're hurting and you're fighting one another. So number 3, keep emotions low. And if emotions start getting too high, take a break. And if one person says, I need to take a break, you probably should let them. You probably should let them. If one person says, we just need to take a break right now, let them walk away. It's not, once they say that, it's not going to do any good to try to keep them there. Let them go. Come back. You can always readjust it. And once emotions get too high, there's nothing healthy that's going to happen anyway. Number 4, always share responsibility. Always share responsibility of whatever the problem is, because I can guarantee you have a part to play in it. Even if the problem you think is 100% on the other person's end, find a way to acknowledge your part in it. This will work wonders for the person you were talking to. Because when the other person feels like all you're doing is pointing the finger, this whole thing is my fault, you just want to blame me. Every time we talk about something, it always comes back to me. It's always my fault, never your fault. Make sure, if that may be the case, it may be that it's like 100%, but figure out a way to figure out how this is a shared responsibility. You know what? You're right. You did do that, but I could have done this better. I could have responded this way. If I gave you this, maybe you wouldn't feel that way. You can always find your part in it. What does that do? Again, it puts us on the same team. It says, I'm not against you. We're on this together, and yes, you had a part, but I see my part in that. And have you ever been in a conversation, intense conversation, and done that? Just take responsibility for something. Just take, you know what, I agree, but here's what I did, and here's what I played into it. It works wonders for the other person because it helps them understand you're not here to just criticize. You want to bear the responsibility of this.
I would say that's one of the most, the quickest ways to diffuse someone is to, all they're wanting to really do, even if they're not doing it perfectly, they're wanting to be understood, and they're wanting you to acknowledge what you did and that you care. So when you say that, it just kind of diffuses the whole moment, takes it back down to, hey, we're on the same team. We really do love each other. And it just kind of diffuses and changes the whole environment, I think.
Yep, absolutely. And number 5 is you have to communicate trust and security. And this is so huge. This is so big. You know, I want to make sure we spend a minute on this because this is a foundation to the marriage, not just communication. And when I say communicate trust and security, this is what I'm saying. You have to communicate to the person, you have to communicate to your spouse, you are loved, you are accepted, and I am with you for life despite whatever we're talking about. And they have to know that. And if they don't have that trust and security, you know, if you are the kind of person that you throw around, well, maybe we should just divorce then. Maybe you should get your own place. That destroys trust and security. Any kind of little comment like that, any kind of statement about divorce or maybe I'm going to leave you or this, that, or that, you are destroying trust and security. I always want to communicate the opposite to my wife. As a matter of fact, I can remember a specific time several years ago. We were talking about something we've talked about multiple times, and, you know, I wanted her to understand, and I said, listen, we're talking about this because it's not healthy, and let's deal with it. We want to deal with it, but I want you to know this. If this never changes, I'm with you for life. If this never changes, I'm married to you for life. We're not going to. This is not that kind of thing. I don't care if this never changes. I think we should talk about it and try to work on it because it's not healthy. But we need to fix it. But I'm with you for life. What does that do? It communicates trust and security when a person knows, all right, we've got to work through this. We may butt heads a little bit, but in the grand scheme of things, we're together, we love each other, and we're not going anywhere. That has to be communicated, and it has to be communicated regularly. It may have to be communicated in the middle of the communication. And lastly, another big one, choose the right timing. Timing is so important about communication. So important. Pay attention to what's going on in their life, what's going on in their job, what's going on in their emotions, everything. Pay attention because there's sometimes you can bring something up and it's just completely insensitive and it's going to be received completely the wrong way. But if you find the right timing in the right moment, then it'll be received a totally different way. So timing is huge when it comes to communication. Anything you want to add?
No, that was good. I think that was it.
Okay. So those two things, negativity and inability to communicate. If we, and the first thing we talked about before we even got into it was our relationship with God. If we could just, those things right there, if we could just have both of us have our relationship with God where it needs to be, eliminate negativity, and work on our communication, you would be shocked at the difference that it would make and how it would improve our marriages, and not just our marriages, but our relationships in general. Amen. Praise God. Let me pray for you.